My father was the inspiration that led me to wind up working as a contractor for NASA. He was building what he called an air-breathing rocket. Uh, he had dreams that it would be able to fly in the upper atmosphere where the rocket could then shut down and an air compressed and a compressed air could be shot into a flame, uh, providing more heat and expansion and shoot that rocket on out into space. Well, he never got any farther than a working model and a lot of drawings, which the FBI or the CIA or somebody came to the house and collected because he was firing that thing out the basement window, had it hanging from the floor joists and was firing it out the basement windows and attracting a lot of attention. And he went to Washington and to tell them what he was doing and that it might very well make a good engine for an airplane. Well, it was a military secret. They'd been working on this jet engines that we now have. So they took his model, they took his drawings, his writings, and they told him not to touch it again after the war. If he wanted them, he could come get all of it. But for now, it was a secret, and he couldn't. Well, I followed him all the way. I traveled everywhere he went, just about. We went to Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore and took out books on air compression and flight and all kinds of stuff. And it was all, and then on the way home, driving home, he'd talk to me about it as if I was a grown man, and explain all of it to me. So I learned a lot from him. Well, here's something else I learned from him. Him and I went over to Washington, D.C. to talk to Pop Goddard, who was the grandfather of modern rocketry. And we went into a lab there and talked to him. While he worked, he never stopped working except to shake my hand, which inspired me greatly. Let me tell you what. Anyway, we went out into the field and where he was doing some experiments out there. He wasn't firing any rockets off, but he was doing other things. And we went out there, and him and Dad talked 100 miles an hour, all the way out and all the way back, and for about an hour and a half in the laboratory there. And he was very interested in what Dad was doing. And he gave Dad a lot of advice on what he was doing and some changes that he could make and advice on the inside shape of the engine that he was trying to build to get the most thrust out of it. So anyway, a bunch of young men there in Dundalk were flying model airplanes on top of Kimmel's Mountain after it had been flattened off to build an airport. And they were flying these models on every Saturday and Sunday. For quite some time, I spent some time up there messing with those guys, and they took me in like one of them almost. And I built some model airplanes, and all of us boys in the neighborhood were inspired by it. And we all built model airplanes. Well, I never had one with an engine on it until after I was grown, but we built rubber band models and sent them up. So I was very interested in space travel, airplanes, and all of that. And I went to NASA looking for a job as a machinist. Well, they turned me down. I had received my high school through Bethlehem Steel in Spires Point, Maryland, and they had given me a certificate for my hours in class and all of that, but it wasn't a diploma. And I needed a diploma. The government wasn't impressed with that certificate at all. So there was only one other way to do it, and that was to go to work for a contractor. And I met Bob Grow and David Grow and Pappy Grow and all of those people who owned Mars Machine Works. I went to work for them making things, and at the time I built the Viking lander shovel for testing Mars soil, I was a machinist there. A little later, I became shop foreman and vice president of the company. And whatever success that was, I kind of have to, I have to blame that on Dad, because he was sure the one who got me started on that path.
Viking will ask a lot of questions, cover a lot of scientific ground, but the focus of attention is on the search for life. And this strange-looking device will do the spade work. In a room near Viking Mission Control, they operate a full-scale test bed model and cause it to function exactly as the real ones will on Mars. It's strange looking and strange sounding, too, as it uncoils itself from the lander and stretches itself out, unrolling and unfolding, preparing to drop down and dig up samples from the soil.
There are 3 experiments in the so-called life detection package. One of these is a gas exchange measurement, which will simply look to see whether samples of Mars soil modify the composition of a piece of Mars atmosphere that's brought into contact with it. There's another experiment which is based on the idea that we might be able to detect the fermentation of substrates that we give to samples of soil. And then finally there is an experiment to test for photosynthesis.
Again, it all appears simple. The soil sampler scoops up its samples and deposits them in one of 3 chambers, which are, in effect, miniaturized laboratories, each one asking different questions. Those questions all relate to the big question, is there a form of life on Mars? 2 answers are possible right away. Yes, there is, or we don't know. The third answer, no, may take a long time. This may not be the right spot, or the experiments may be asking the wrong questions. The matter of life ever existing on Mars in the past will take even longer. Whatever the immediate short-term answer, those who've been waiting will feel that it's worth all the effort and the expense.
But the thing that really turns me on is the idea that there might be a separate and distinct origin of life on Mars. You know, if you really had it happen twice in this tiny little sun solar system that we have, 2 adjacent planets, the same geological time frame, both independently started life, why the universe must be teeming with life. And if that's true, who are we to say that we're the smart ones? You know, we may be somewhere in the middle. One is always in the middle of some curve.
And we play the statistical game that's played with stars and planets and how many millions or billions of them are there and how many of them should have produced life. And as you know, it turns out that you end up with literally many millions, at least, of planets that should have evolved life.
I realize it sounds kind of science fiction, but the fact is, these things are not inconceivable. The numbers drive you in the direction where you're forced to believe that if there's an independent form of life on Mars in our time frame, it would not be unwise to listen in the heavens for coherent signals, to listen in on other civilizations.
For now, though, it's enough to listen in on Mars. One day soon, the real thing will happen. The soil sampler will move down to the collection chambers and shake and rattle as it sifts the soil into the containers. And then the waiting will be over as the answers begin coming back.